So it's 7 o'clock, and I'm going to call the Concord Finance Committee meeting to order. We have a quorum in a combination of some members on Zoom and in person today. So this is a hybrid meeting for us. Okay, so we have a couple of items. So a correspondence, I sent you around a letter that I received, so you saw that with respect to Article 18. So we had that. There are no minutes that I'm aware of. Is that right, Kerry? We don't have any minutes, right? Okay. Okay, so we're going to go to chair's comments then. So we have two warrant articles open. We're going to, as you know, so we have the affordable housing as well as Assabet Bluff.
Okay.
We're expecting at the FinCom meeting on a week from now, on March 31st, that we would, after the select board votes on 228, we'll probably take our votes, okay? Tonight, we're going to have some further discussion on Article 18 CPS. And I also wanted to let you know there was an administrative issue with the high school capital warrant article. I don't remember that number off the top of my head, but that is for the 800,000 or thereabouts for the paving, and that requires excluded debt. And the date to have the question, because excluded debt has to be voted on in a ballot vote, it needed to be on by a certain date to get on the April 12th ballot. They missed the date, so now the vote will be in September. So I just want the committee to know that. So I don't know if that, I don't think it changes anything for us, but just so you know, they won't be, the secondary vote on that won't be until September, which means they won't be able to start spending the money until September, which kind of is a little later than they would have wanted. Last Monday, there was a transportation session that was run by the select board. It was very interesting. So the TAC has some very thoughtful recommendations about town transportation strategy and some potential grant funding. I would encourage you to watch that video if you weren't able to attend. Alan Carthgate, the head of DPW, attended that as well, and his comments resonated with me. And that were, he said, I think twice, before we, just, nothing against, as I said, these recommendations are quite good. It's about transportation strategy for the town. But his caution, if anybody has that? You have that?
That was me.
Okay, all right. So what Alan was saying was that, before we expand our roads, sidewalks, and bikeways, we need to catch up on deferred maintenance. And I think that's a comment that resonates with me. It's one of the discussions we're probably likely to have next year on FinCom, but just to pay attention to that. Okay, so at the start of the year, we had some topics. We divided up our world into different topics, and one of those topics was affordable housing. And tonight we have with us Keith Bergman, and I have invited him, and Keith chairs the Concord Municipal Housing Trust. And they've recently completed some guidelines for how that group would like to think about prioritizing the spend of money within the pool that the town has. And that's one of the discussions that we had at the beginning of the year. We've had it for the past several years. We have some concerns about the source of funding at this point, the sole source of funding for most of the affordable housing spend being the appropriations from free cash. So Keith's going to talk to us a bit tonight about those new guidelines. He also provided you a reconciliation, which I think is very helpful in terms of the amount of funds that have been put into the fund and how they have been spent. So I think we may touch on that as well. And I'm hoping as well, maybe he could give us a little update on the status of the legislative items and where they are in the state. So we're going to talk about that, and I think some of the other we have our chance to ask our questions, and I know some of my questions perhaps won't be able to be answered, but to the extent that we have concerns on affordable housing spending, tonight would be a good chance to talk with Keith about that. So please bring up your ideas and your questions. So with that, I'm gonna ask Keith to, I don't know how we do this, to join us. Let me see, I'll give you a microphone, or here, you want to pull up a chair?
Yeah, I can pull up a chair and microphone and get a picture of the back of my head. Great, thank you. Well, thanks very much. Keith Bergman, 56 White Avenue, Chair of the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. And I should probably just admit that I've been coming to Finance Committee meetings for 40 years. And so welcome. So I'm welcoming myself back. I was saying earlier, as a town manager and in other communities, I had sometimes had better luck at town meeting, had a better batting average at town meeting than with finance committees, but it was always, but this is where I got my practice to hit it out of the park at town meeting. So I know what the questions are. So anyway, other members of the trust, we're a 5-member board, which has been in existence since September. Other members are Select Board member Linda Escobedo, big screen to see. Well, our interim town manager, Carrie LaFleur, is also a voting member of the trust, as is former Select Board member Mike Lawson, who I see in the big board, and Frank Rich Feely, who's also president of the Concord Housing Foundation, is on the trust. So we're the 5 that put together this set of guidelines. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to review those. They were approved by the Select Board on March 7th. We spent several months, almost all of the time that we've been in existence, thinking about what those guidelines should be, engaging with our fellow housing stakeholders. In fact, we launched that effort at the November Concord Housing Roundtable, which is the quarterly meeting that the Regional Housing Services Office convenes with the Housing Authority, the Housing Foundation, the Housing Development Corporation, and now us. So that's been a great opportunity for us to get involved. And I think, as I'll get into somewhat, the guidelines that we're presenting you are interim guidelines, because we sort of made a conscious decision that there's a natural separation between interim, based on the current funding level, and the long term, which is based on the funding level that was envisioned by the 2019 town meeting that approved the package of proposals brought forward by the Affordable Housing Funding Committee, and also that the housing production plan, which is an important document for us to have and keep updated. That plan is dated 2015. It expired last year, and it is we just launched. We're part of the process that just launched the updating of the housing production plan, which will take probably till the end of the year, early next year, where it would be approved by the Select Board and the Planning Board, and then the state. That will be an important milestone to have, but even more important is the process that we will be engaging with all of our fellow housing stakeholders, with the community, with all aspects of the community, to look at what are the best ways to achieve our housing goal, because financial is part of it. But if you only do that, you're going to run out of money, even if you had an endless supply. And you've got to, I'd say, the community must produce housing through the regulatory process as well, that the market needs to be tapped to produce housing. We addressed that issue in Littleton in 2017 when I was town administrator there. by bringing forward a package of master plan housing goals brought as a package, including the adoption of an affordable housing trust, but also the adoption of an inclusionary zoning bylaw, which required that there, for any development over 6 units, that 10% be set aside for affordable, deed restricted, and beyond a certain level, that payments could be made in lieu of the requirement for production of an affordable unit on site. So the ironic thing was, and I was talking about it before the meeting started, that at the time when our Affordable Housing Trust in Littleton got established, we had the history that even though we had also adopted the Community Preservation Act, as Concord has, we hadn't had any takers for the housing dollars, apart from maybe the Housing Authority needed a new roof. But so we had $500,000 that was accumulated, and the Housing and the Community Housing Committee had not been active in that area, so they were only too happy to say, please take this balance and put it in there. But at the same time, one of the reasons we didn't have takers was that the market was producing the housing. 200 units on the Acton town line, for which we could count, like 130 on the subsidized housing inventory. So we're achieving some of those things and getting zoning through town meeting. So that's just to say that the answer, my firm belief, that the answer to housing is not just through the expenditure of public funds. It can't be. That's an important part. It's an important component, but it's not the big picture. So meanwhile, I'm going to take us back, and you have, excuse me, the documents, 5 pages, 3 pages of text. There's 2 pages of a table of just defining low and moderate income, but we purposely added a background section at the beginning to sort of say, what's the story thus far? How did we get to where we are, and what's the context? And so I do want to take us back briefly to the 2019 annual town meeting, when the Affordable Housing Funding Committee's measures were passed as a package, that you had the acceptance of the statute that authorizes an affordable housing trust, that now some communities would do in one sitting, accept the statute and approve a bylaw. In Concord, it was set up. I came into the picture when I was approached in 2019, after that town meeting, 2019, about being on the committee to draft the bylaw. And I chaired that Affordable Housing Trust Study Committee as well. But acceptance of the statute was one. Authorizing the 2 home rule petitions was the other, for a real estate transfer fee and for building permit surcharge. Both have been reported out favorably by committee in the last couple of months at the legislative level. Both are awaiting 3rd readings in the Senate. And if nothing else, we have a lot of company. There are 8 other communities that have also had their home rule petitions for real estate transfer fees reported out favorably, as well as a statewide proposal for a real estate transfer fee, which is still active. It hasn't been reported out, but they got an extension and it is still active. And the company we have, City of Boston, Somerville, my old towns of Provincetown and Nantucket, as well as Concord and others. So there's a lot of company, and I have to say that in a normal year, when you couldn't point to favorable committee reports, that you think it's a lost cause. But hope is still alive. What is it going to look like at the end? Is it going to be the home rule petitions that get passed? Is it going to be statewide bill? We don't know, but we know that we're still in the game at this point, which I think is which is more than we could have pointed to before. And then lastly and by the way, that the estimated, I think it's important to note that the Affordable Housing Funding Committee's estimate of what annual income would be if those home rule petitions passed, according to their report, was $2.6 million a year. So that's sort of so when we think about short-term, long-term, it's the difference between $500,000 a year if we're successful in getting, continuing to get that kind of funding. We hope through ARPA this year, versus having a longer-term revenue source that doesn't come from the property taxpayers, that comes from other fees that are established. And then in the meantime, for the interim funding, which as I say, we would be hopeful of getting ARPA funds. When the Affordable Housing Study Committee brought its bylaw to town meeting in September, ultimately in September of 2020, our pitch was that the trust would complement the town's existing affordable housing efforts and entities and programs by being able to act quickly when affordable housing opportunities arise. That's the uniqueness. That's what the trust uniquely offers, that it doesn't have to wait, assuming there's money in the trust fund, that you don't have to wait for a vote of town meeting to approve an expenditure. That if you have, even with a balance of, cumulatively thus far $1.5 million that's been available for three successive town meeting votes, that those expenditures of funds don't require a further vote of town meeting. They require that prior to the trust, they simply required votes of the select board, who control the funds, and then the select board in December transferred the oversight of the remaining funds to the trust. So we're carrying out the policy decisions the select board made up till then. And then since then, we've only had one application in front of us. It's one you're very familiar with, the Assabet River Bluff. And we approved $650,000 towards the $1 million total. The other pieces being $50,000 from the Concord Housing Foundation and $300,000 recommended by the Community Preservation Committee to reach the $1 million for 5 affordable units. But where we saw, and believe me, we didn't do that much without having first briefed the select board that this is this is what we're being asked to do. Waited to see if there were a lot of, if there was a lot of consternation about us, committing funds for that project. And, we felt that we had the go-ahead, but in particular, what we could uniquely do is be the source of funding for the deposit that the seller was requiring in order to give town meeting even the ability to consider whether they wanted to complete the funding and authorize the acquisition. And $50,000 of our trust funds for a refundable deposit has been paid to the seller. We cut the check to the CHDC. CHDC cut their check, along with a check from the Conservation Land Trust. That was where the other funds came for the $140,000 deposit. The P&S agreement has just been signed. It was reported to us by CHDC Chair Lee Smith, but it was a unique thing that we could offer because we had funds and because we didn't need to wait for a vote of town meeting. We could just vote. That was our first vote, was to approve the $50,000 to preserve the opportunity for town meeting. Other things that are important in the bylaw that we brought forward was that the committee that I chaired to draft the bylaw specifically came up with language that was, I'd say, unique for Concord, and it's that we were asked at a meeting, how do we make sure this isn't some rogue entity? That's a good question. Part of it is the 5 people that I just listed who are on the trust, hardly a rogue group, although, Mike?
Mike.
Yeah, there's Mike, he's smiling. But that we wanted to codify where we fit into the big picture. And so we came up with language that said that it would, that essentially directed the trustees to develop policy goals and statements consistent with the town's adopted housing goals and subject to the approval of the select board to serve as guidelines for the trust. So that even though we didn't need even select board approval to approve an expenditure, we do, by the way, need select board approval to borrow money or to accept or to dispose of property. And I remember standing at that podium during a town meeting, public hearing, before we brought the bylaw forward, saying that the ability, just as the natural resources, the Conservation Commission has the ability to accept open space land, a donation, with just the select board approval, not even town meetings. We thought that Concord ought to be equipped with that too for affordable housing. Should someone want to, donate property, there ought to be a way to accept it. So we put that in there as well. But on the policy guidelines, what we did was to identify the need to first know what the housing goals were. Liz Rust at the Housing Services Office prepared a table for us, which we took on the road, saying, all right, well, here are the goals. Here's the Envision Concord housing plan. Here's the housing production goals. And here are the community preservation's guidelines for community housing projects. So which of these goals should the trust prioritize? Some of them that are not financial goals, they have to do more with zoning and other things. And it was helpful for us this year that it was a community preservation, that the entity that asked us for money started off with the CPC, and all the boxes they had to check off of the CPC's guidelines we could rely on as meeting important goals for the town. And so we met with the Housing Authority, the Housing Foundation, the CHDC. We shared a draft of our guidelines with the Community Preservation Committee and had plenty of stakeholder involvement, planning board, this board, others, send liaisons to our meetings. So we had an opportunity to get, we think, a good deal of input. And one of the things that came forward was the notion that our guidelines really did need to separate out the long term from the short term, that there was little point in developing a set of goals or a set of new goals that were unique to us or somehow are distilling what the town's goals were, when we were just about to engage in the housing production plan update, which is going to be, as I say, is going to be a months-long effort to figure out what our new goals should be, because the 2015 plan had no notion of that the issues we're dealing with now, that the community is dealing with now, whether it's the strategy to get real funding out of the state through the real estate transfer fee and otherwise, to do housing, to be proactive in housing that way, or to do whatever the town ends up doing under the change in the law that requires MBTA communities to address housing goals. And I should mention another hat I wear, there's a lot of them, is I'm a immediate past president of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and I'm still on their executive committee, and I chair their legislative committee. And just a couple of days ago, MAPC issued its comprehensive set of comprehensive comments on the draft guidelines that the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development issued about those MBTA guidelines, really pushing more towards, don't just do multifamily housing is right, give us credit, give the communities more credit for affordable housing, because right now there's no requirement that any of the multifamily housing be affordable, and that the goal should be sort of tailored around what the specifics are in an individual community. Don't use a cookie cutter approach. So I think there's some thoughtful help that we can, that we'll be able to look at. The last thing that I would mention is that what we did feel that would be important to do in these set of guidelines is to give some more practical guidance on what would qualify as a project, as well as what the selection criteria are. When push comes to shove, we want to add units to the subsidized housing inventory. With whatever limited funds we have, we're most interested in seeing that the units that we do are countable. That's why, for example, we sort of balked when we were first approached on the Assabet River Bluff project in September or October, where it was more units, more housing units, but maybe 2 would be affordable. So, and we were being asked for $2 million at the time. So what, $2 million for 2 units, maybe doesn't, so when they came back with $1 million for 5 units, that was, that made the sale with us. So, and the last thing that I want to point you to is the table, the low and moderate income. And just, I gave a presentation last week to the Mass Housing Partnership for a session on housing entities, how they can collaborate amongst each other. And we had a lot of takers when I unveiled these guidelines. Ooh, can I get a copy of those? Because maybe because others don't have written guidelines, and I'm sure that none others have the table, because the statute that creates the Affordable Housing Trust does not define what low and moderate income is. So you're left to figure it out. Don't guess wrong. Make sure you get guidance from your town council, but that look at where the money's coming from is what tells you what low and moderate income. So if it comes from the Community Preservation Act, then it's 80% for low, and it's no more than 100% for moderate. If it's from some other source, and we went through them one by one, including, what about these home rule petitions that were filed? What do they say? Well, some of them just say, some of them don't say. One of them simply adopts the language of the Affordable Housing Trust statute. Another one, the building permit surcharge, references another section of law where the answer is 120% of area-wide median income. And the statewide bill that's being proposed says 175% of AMI, except that there's a big asterisk after it that it could be lower depending upon where the funds come from. ARPA funds, we also looked at, and if it's ARPA, if it's pure ARPA, that is above, say, outside of the, what you can do with, if you're below the $10 million threshold, if you're doing pure ARPA, then that's 60% for rental and 80% for ownership, both in low income, and nothing for moderate income. So just to know, if you're, and even in our guidelines, under moderate income for ARPA, we put to be determined, because it depends on whether the ARPA funds are viewed as pure ARPA or whether it's viewed as the lost revenue category. So it makes a difference. So this is what we've been up to. We're committed to not being a rogue entity, but working with our fellow housing entities and with the with the policy guidance of the town and the select board. So.
Well, thank you very much, Keith. That was great, and it helps to clarify and set the stage for how complicated this really is, particularly that table. When you see that there isn't a clear definition of, depending on where the money comes from, what you could actually spend it on and what's considered affordable. So maybe I'll go first and I'll open it up to the committee. So my questions, as you and I discussed in the fall, will really come later, because it's really when the housing production plan is done that the town gets a picture of, well, what is our number, what would qualify for 40B, what doesn't. One of the other things that when we started to understand this was, you actually have certain properties that the restriction can lapse, so that after a certain period of time, something that was on the inventory can actually come off. So there's a bit of it can be
Expiring
a moving,
use permits.
exactly, you can have a bit of a moving target. So having clarity around for me, what is the goal, right? So is it, if the number one goal is 40B, because for obvious reasons that might be the first thing we want to make sure we meet. We assume with Christopher Heights we're going to have that. If Christopher Heights, right, exactly. Let's assume it's going forward, then what is it after that, right? And so what's the definition after that? So if you hit 40B first, then what is it after that? How much do you want to spend per unit? How much dense units? How many singles? If you want, how much do you want to move the needle, right? So if you're at, I don't know, if you're at 15%, you want to go to 20. What's the number?
Right.
So,
or it could be that the needle is not simply the number of units that qualify for counting on the subsidized housing inventory, but are in fact, what do you need to house your workforce? What do you,
Right.
and there are other communities that are looking at middle income Provincetown, I think, where I was town manager for 17 years there, and is looking at, I think they've had legislation passed which allows them to at least have a fund for basically middle income housing, because of the pressures that they're under, which would lawfully allow them to have funds put away for that purpose. Of course, then the question comes, where do you get the money if there's no real estate transfer fee? But that the but you could also achieve it through zoning. You could also achieve it by having the requirements be not simply just as our planned. One of the other boxes in that table is it's already in the zoning bylaw under planned residential development, which has starter priced housing 110%, moderate price housing 150%. So you can put categories into your zoning to help you get the housing that you want through developer incentives, and without necessarily as much of an expenditure of public funds.
so as your committee, as you evolve those guidelines, and then once the housing production plan becomes available, let's say in, I don't know, 6, 9 months, whatever it is, at that point, would you start to be evolving these guidelines with more, sort of quantitative goals to say we want to be here, or?
Yes, I'll say that's my goal, and I'm happy to make sure that ball gets carried through our trust and through the housing production plan process, because I think it's what the community is looking for, is an articulation of numerical goals, and there's nothing wrong with that, and it's important to know where you want to be, and then you take a step back and say, how do you get there?
And you report it, right? So you'd actually have a way to say, this was our goal, this is where we are, right? So we could say, this is what we've spent towards getting this goal, here's what it costs us per unit, or whatever the right measure is, and here we are.
And I'll give you an example, because another hat that I wear is I'm on the board of advisors for a nonprofit, Housing Nantucket, and I put this in my slideshow, and just to wow people, but because it's such a different world there. But did you know that there's a place in the Commonwealth where a nonprofit housing entity can be approached by the town and say, we need 22 affordable units that we have to add on to the subsidized housing inventory to achieve safe harbor, because we're below 10% and we want to ward off unfriendly 40Bs. And oh, by the way, here's $10 million. Make it so. And we got a $3 million grant and a $7 million construction loan to build a project. And that town appropriates $15–20 million per year through bond issues, excluded debt, to fund its affordable housing trust. But my point is that they know where they want to be. They have goals, and then they have the resources to back it up.
Right. No, that makes sense. Yes, those are the things that I'm, sort of interested in. Then the last thing, I'll let everybody else go, is also figuring out what the right approach is, right? So depending on how far you want to move the needle, is it onesie twosies, which tend to be pretty expensive, or are we going to go a different way? And I know I'm not asking for an answer to that, but I'm assuming that's going to be part of the consideration.
That's certainly part of it, and it does get down to to the extent that public funds are involved, even if it's not property taxpayers are paying, someone, whoever's the building permit surcharge payer, or someone's paying. So shouldn't we try to get the best bang for the buck, or what is the scale that you can do it and still be respecting the community that you're building it in? And just so happened, on Nantucket, they did not like a 200 unit, but they loved 22. So they made the smaller one happen.
Yeah. Good. Okay, that's me. Please, who would like to go next? Dean?
Sure. So I have two basic questions. The housing production plan of 2015 that we have now, what was the entity that created that before it fell into the lap of the Affordable Housing Trust? Where did that come from when it was created?
You're asking where does the housing production plan come from? That is for any community that is below the 10% threshold. The housing production plan is the only safety valve that you can have. So it's a state agency, and it's created by the state. It is the select board and the planning board approve the plan, and how the plan comes about. I think we're actually now with. It's a combination of the Regional Housing Service Office and outside consultant working with housing stakeholders. And I'd say the only difference is you got another seat at the table now. That the folks that have been the stakeholders doing housing, the planning folks and the other housing entities and whoever else was involved before. The only difference really is that the Housing Trust will also be at that table.
So you're not taking the primary responsibility for it. You're just another party.
We're just another party,
okay.
And as we will take the prime responsibility for being informed, having our next set of guidelines be informed and consistent with that housing production plan. So, in fact, we even asked ourselves, well, when we started in September, how soon is the housing production plan update going to kick off? And maybe we can just dive into that, and then we will emerge a few months later with regulations. And it was a little, the timetable was a little different because the 2020 census figures, haven't come out yet. The state is not, maybe not until later this year will the state be issuing the new denominator for the 10% goal. It's a fraction, the number of the numerators, the number of subsidized housing inventory units divided by the decennial census figure for year-round housing. That's not the raw data of population. It's it's the nuanced data that DHCD goes through, the state goes through to see which ones are occupied on a year-round basis.
So my second question has to do with the sort of overlay mapping of how the new MBTA requirements will fundamentally alter the landscape here in Concord. And you already mentioned that it would be helpful if, although that doesn't really require that those are, that anything in that block is affordable, it would be very good if we're pushed into having some high density housing, that some of that is affordable. So is there some way we can like put that into our planning bylaws or something like that?
Well, I think that it will be under great consideration as the housing production plan is formulated, and there are a lot of communities going through this this same requirement as a lot of MBTA communities that are facing the requirement. And my hope is that the way the requirement is written now will be significantly modified. I'll give you just one example. One of the things that MAPC has proposed that once there's an agreed upon density number or the number of units that a community should be zoning for, not producing but zoning for, that for an affordable unit, MAPC says maybe at moderate income it should count as 1.5 units towards whatever your goal is. And if it's low income, it should count as 2 units. So instead of building 10, you could build a smaller number of affordable units to achieve a goal. So that's a process that we, along with all the other communities, will need to monitor, but where it's the once in a generation opportunity to create housing, and if it's all just market rate and nothing's affordable, then great opportunity.
I'm sure many communities have their concerns about this push down on them to create high density housing. I'm thinking of a very low usage station in Lincoln. You go through on your way to Waltham and you look around and it's nothing but woods. And I can't imagine a 50-acre zone there with high density housing.
There's housing there.
Yeah, but not at the level that the MBTA plan is requiring. So it's a concern, I'm sure, for many communities who are not anywhere near the density levels that.
It shouldn't be a cookie cutter approach. It should be much more nuanced for what the needs and situation is in each community.
Thanks. So Keith, I'm so glad that we put together this municipal housing trust when we voted it, and that it's seated and that you're chairing it, because we have a much more thoughtful approach now. So I'm grateful to you for that and the rest of the committee.
It's a great group.
It is a great group.
Thank you all.
But I've got some questions. What I've heard is that according to the 2010 census, we are above the 10% SHI, and I think we're expecting that even with the 2020 census, we'll just squeak by the 10%. So I guess that means that right now we have an opportunity to do some work on workforce housing. And do we have any inventory of the workforce housing that we currently have in Concord?
I don't know what the answer to that is.
Okay.
What I would say though is that until we're sure we're above 10%,
Yep.
with the 2020 census, we should assume otherwise. And so our focus is, if we're estimating, or the official estimates from the planning office are, we should come out at 10.04.
Yeah. Right. Well,
Okay.
that's
so
above
you
10.
lose 1 or 2, or And we don't have control, you know, as we don't have control of some of the units that get counted on our SHI because they are not our units. They are, you know, under a state program or something. We don't control them. We benefit from them when we get to count them. But if they're gone, if they fall off, there's nothing that we can do to keep them on. So we're just, you know, we're hopeful that the timing is that if the building permit, when the Christopher Heights building permits get issued and we can count those units on the SHI, then we will be comfortably above 10%. Time being.
Okay, so we'll wait and see. Right. Okay, I have one more question. Even if we get the real estate transfer tax, and given that our current cost per unit is so high, I think you've pointed out that we need more than just simply money in order to meet some of our goals. And some of that is inclusionary zoning. So educate me, and who initiates that type of change for a town? Who does that? Who starts that ball rolling?
Yeah, I would say that we have the unique opportunity to answer that question by being the group that's assembled for the housing production plan update, if nowhere else, but the planning board is already, you know, to the extent that there's a inclusionary zoning provision in what's being considered
In the thorough redistricting?
For thorough
Redistrict, yep.
I mean, that's one example.
Okay.
I think it needs to be, that if you're going to do inclusionary zoning, you need to have some notion of, well, where would it, you know, where would the development occur? Where are you okay with higher density housing occurring? Because that's the other thing of how do you, you know, as we said before, how do you get the per unit cost down? Well, by having more units
Right.
in the development, and just don't have them the development so large that the community chokes on it and doesn't want it. So finding that comfortable spot.
Yeah. Hi, Keith. Thank you for the presentation and the update on where things stand. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the proposed rezoning in the Thoreau district and wondering if about the degree of coordination with your work and whether or not, because I think to become real, your work ends up in the zoning, and here we are making zoning changes before the work is complete to say what the town really requires.
Yeah, our trust did offer comments on that part of the proposed zoning amendment that had dealt with us, which was there's a sort of a narrow provision of circumstances when if there's the basic requirement for some number of affordable, you know, percentage of affordable units, and if it's above 50, if when you calculate the percentage, if the number of units that would be built is above, you know, if you can round up to the nearest whole, you do. If you can't, you round down, and you would round down to zero. In lieu of that, rather than that, you will pay a proportional amount. Rather than rounding down, you'll pay a proportional amount into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So that's an opportunity. So we become the rounding error, but that's great. You know, so rather than lose the unit, that what we liked about it is that it recognized that one place you could, rather than lose the unit, you could get a proportional amount of money into the trust. It's a good start.
Did the trust have any other feedback?
We did not on that proposal.
Does that mean you were pleased with the proposal?
No, that means that we reviewed the part of the proposal that pertained directly to us.
Why don't you complete your thought?
No, that's it. That we decided, you know, we're still in our shakedown period and didn't want things to get too shaky. Again, especially because we're looking to engage in a more comprehensive process where we will, you know, and we recognize that we're a lot of the input that we'll make in that housing production plan process will be about things that are just for the sake of housing. How do you produce affordable housing?
Yes.
And it may not be us. I hope it's not
Right.
all us. It's got to be.
And if it isn't you, it's going to end up in zoning, correct?
Yeah, or if it's an inclusionary, to the extent that it's an inclusionary zoning bylaw, which has some provision for in lieu payments rather than production of the affordable units on site, then that's an opportunity for the trust to benefit financially. But even in that circumstance, the preference would be for the developer to provide the unit so that we don't have to pay for it.
Right. So in the, I'm going to paraphrase what I think I've heard you say, and you tell me if I'm correct, but in the preparation of the once-in-a-lifetime zoning changes that, you're right, speaking about developing housing is housing is a lifetime asset. So the town has these two resources. We have the zoning board and their planning consultants, and we have the Affordable Housing Trust, and the two are not hand in glove, even though affordable housing seems to be an objective in both cases. Fair enough?
Well, I would say that if only because we weren't present at the creation of, we came in right in the middle of everything, really, and the process of looking at that zoning amendment's gone on for years now, and the obligation that would exist, the challenge, the requirement, if you read the statute under for the MBTA communities, is going to present frankly a different, broader problem to solve.
Yes.
And that one, we think we're right on.
Yes.
We're present at the creation of that one, and would feel that would be we'd have a better opportunity to make sure that how to fit that zoning in with how it could affect the funding of the trust will be more hand in glove.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a process question. I want to kind of piggyback on Mary's question too. Where does our 40B level, you said is sort of, we're squeaking by. We could be squeaking by on at the 20-year census. Where does Junction Village fit into this? Did we get recognized for those units?
No.
Or, okay, so.
No, they are not on the subsidized housing inventory now, but they will be when the building permit is issued.
Okay, and
But
so.
it could have been that they were, that there must have come a point when that got approved and maybe they were initially counted, but you have to issue in some cases, even what I've seen happen is that there'll be an initial bump where after a project is approved, you get to count them on your subsidized housing inventory. And then you have a finite period of time for the issuance of building permits. And if you don't issue the building permit within that window, they fall off.
Okay.
And they only go back on when the building permits are issued. So
We may have missed our window on Junction Village
I'm
with respect to the 2020
I'm
consensus.
unclear on that. May not be the case at all, but the fact is that once the building permit's issued, you get to count them.
Okay, so theoretically, if we missed our window, we won't be able to count them until the 2030 census?
No, you count them as soon as they're
As soon as they're
right. The numerator is fluid. As soon as you count the units, you get to add them. It's the denominator that only changes every 10 years.
see. Okay. And then I was in the car listening, but I may have missed this and you may have covered it. From a process standpoint, in terms of the policy statement itself, how is that process regulated? And how often would that policy get updated? Can you just kind of walk me through that one more time, please? Yeah,
It's our intention that these interim policy goals that you've developed and which the select board has approved will get replaced by a permanent set of goals that will be reflective of the housing production plan that gets finalized later this year, and hopefully as well when the funding level changes to a higher amount from an outside source, from a non-public, property tax source. If we're talking about $2.6 million coming from a real estate transfer fee and a building permit surcharge, rather than $500,000 annually from other, local resources or even ARPA funds, that will be the trigger for when we go to the next level. And probably if that every 5 years thereafter, that because the housing production plan has a shelf life of 5 years, and you got to get it approved that often.
That's what I
So I think that's not an unreasonable time limit to say, all right, every time you update the housing production plan, put all that energy into it, you've got to make sure that the guidelines for the trust are updated as well.
I think Peggy on Zoom has a question. So Peggy Briggs.
Yes, I do. Thank you. One question, you mentioned the guidelines that are approved by the select board. Are those approved or accepted? There's different kind of statuses.
Yeah, the guidelines were adopted by the trust and subject to approval by the select board. So the trust approved them on February 24th, subject to the select board's approval under section 6, item 18 of our bylaw, of the town's bylaw. And so the select board's action is approval of the bylaws that of the guidelines that the trust has adopted.
Okay, I just I did sit on the long range plan committee, and one thing that was I would very strongly like to see is, especially if there's any public funding, that the affordable status of any units are in perpetuity. I used to think 30 years was a long time, but I don't anymore. And we've had, a lot of 40B stuff roll off. So I hope in the housing production plan, there's a requirement for perpetuity. I'd also be interested in whether or not we can use the funds to buy down existing 40Bs. So for example, the Muse has, more 100 units, I think, of affordable housing, all under 40B. So I think it's 25 years. Is there a way that we can start buying those down into, perpetuity, rather than spending, as we were talking about, 500, $1 million on a new unit? So that's it. One other thing, I noticed you had said you reached out to all the housing stakeholders in developing your guidelines, and I just hope that includes people like the business roundtable, the realtors, the chamber, because if they're not included at this stage, believe me, they'll be there at town meeting. So just hope that your stakeholder group is not limited to, planning board, long range plan, and all the housing groups. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. All points well taken, and I agree with all that I heard. Anything less than perpetuity, in short, for deed restriction. We do have the ability. You do have the ability, if you got the money, to buy down units. We with the funds that by town meeting, but it's a common use of public funds for housing buy, to turn an expiring use permit into a permanent one, so that you're counting the units. And that would certainly be something that would be eligible for, under our guidelines, because it counts.
And that may be less expensive the sooner you try it. Where there's still scope left in the affordable nature of 40B. So,
Right. Thank you.
okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else on Finance Committee have any questions for Keith?
I do.
Yeah, Ray.
Peggy mentioned stakeholders. I assume Emerson Hospital Partners is considered one of those housing stakeholders?
Well, I hope so, but I'm not, but I would have to, I'm not the entity that invites people to the table for the housing production plan. I just have a chair.
Okay. The other question is,
But I will say, that's an important one, and if it's not, I shouldn't prejudge what the answer is, but I will say the community I'm more familiar with, that I know, Nantucket, for example, Nantucket Cottage Hospital is a player. They are there at the table, and they just spent millions of dollars to build housing for their hospital employees.
okay. The other question, you mentioned that the permanent guidelines really would require, ideally, the housing production plan from 2022 and the home rule petition. It sounds like the first one is going to be months away, maybe a larger number than we'd like, but still within a year. And the second one is unknown. Would that?
I agree with that. Yeah, I have a higher level of confidence about when the housing production plan will be completed than I do when the state will approve our home rule petitions.
Would the guidelines change at all when the housing production plan is in hand and the home rule is not?
It's hard to say. I think we certainly need to, I think it would be important to assume that we're in the long term, that with the housing production plan, that we have long-term goals, and that we're assuming that we're should be looking to achieve the, not just what we can do with half a million a year as a trust, but what are the town's goals? How do you achieve the level you want to be at? And whatever the funding level is, maybe you have a tiered implementation plan for the point at which some outside funding source kicks in. Then the responsibility of the trust would take on even more a part of achieving the town's numerical goals than we could with a smaller amount.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions on Zoom or in the room for Keith? I think we've kept him here quite a bit. We really appreciate your time. I think we're good. Okay, so
Great.
thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Okay,
Thank you. And I'll be back.
okay.
We'll see you at town meeting.
Thanks very much, Keith. Okay, so next item on the agenda is, we had a discussion last week, the past couple of weeks, on the CPS budget, Article 18, where we still have a guideline difference on CPS. And Parashar wanted to take us through a proposal.
Thank you very much. Chris, can we get to the slides I'd prepared? And I think everybody had gotten a copy this afternoon. Okay. So while they come up, as Chris mentioned, we've talked about this since last summer, as the organizational entities have started developing budget for fiscal year 23. What I was hoping to do today is continue the conversation that we've had. Last time around, we talked a little bit about where the approved CPS budget currently stands. And I think there was, we voted formally, I think. What's the formal term?
No action.
No action on Article 18. What I'd like to do today is discuss a potential amendment that we can make to the article. Chris, if you can go to the next slide. Very simple amendment, which is in essence to move to amend the main motion to change the sum from 43,148,899, which is the currently approved budget, to 42,836,314, which is our guideline number. So walk through just a little bit of thinking on this. If we go to the next slide, clearly the CPS budget doesn't meet the guideline that we had set. The guideline itself is a 2.7% increase above the fiscal year 2022 budget. As you all know, we spent a considerable amount of time both in the summer as well as in the fall discussing the guidelines for all three organizations. We made a conscious decision in how we set the guidelines for all three, especially considering prior spending in the last couple of years, both at the town, the CPS, and the high school. Also considering the needs that they have, not only for this year, but in the future years coming up as well. And while the school CPS did a reasonable job in terms of coming up with the budget, there's still a gap of 0.72% between what they have proposed versus the guideline. And so, if you go to the next slide, you can ask yourself, well, why should CPS meet the guideline, frankly? And I think it's really important to, again, step back and take a look at why it's important to meet the guideline. First of all, the approved budget that has been approved by the superintendent and the school committee is 3.45% higher than fiscal year 2022. And if you take a look at what's coming down the pike, according to the school's own estimates of future cost growth, on an average annual basis, costs are expected to increase by 3.76% each year. And so what you're seeing is a future path where the costs are even higher, projected to be increasing at a higher rate than what they're proposing to increase for 23. That actually doesn't even count the extra money the town will be paying to fund the middle school over the next 5 years. So I think from my perspective, it's critical that we begin to moderate growth across the town to help finance the new middle school, because financing the middle school as well as the schools comes mostly from property taxes, as we all know. And without moderating that cost growth, our property taxes will go up. And if you go to the last slide, there's a number of different options. We have not, as far as I know, been presented with any options of how the gap could be closed, nor any trade-offs, which on a personal basis is a bit frustrating, to be perfectly honest. But the gap can be closed. There's a number of different options. I just put one up there, relatively simple. The schools could reduce all non-salary planned spending, which is $7.2 million is what they're proposing for fiscal year 2023, which is about 16%, 1/6 of the budget. You can simply do an across-the-board reduction by 4.3% to close the gap. There's a number of other combination of lower spending for non-salary items, slowing down the pace of filling open non-teaching positions, et cetera, could close the gap. And I'm sure that there are others as well. So I am reasonably confident. I don't want to be in the position of micromanaging the budget, because in fact, that's the role of the school leadership, to actually come up with options and present trade-offs for the town to consider. And none of those, frankly, have been put forward. So that's some of the rationale for the motion that I think the Finance Committee should make.
Okay. Discussion on Parshaw's presentation there.
I agree with Parshaw that this is an appropriate motion for the Finance Committee to make. At the risk of micromanaging their budget, he had a slide showing a few options that they have that could be exercised to get there. I would also throw one more into the mix. Right now, I think in both the CCRSD, which is not on our discussion this evening, but also at CPS, which is what we're talking about, the school is intent in their operating budget on buying additional diesel school buses. And if they just defer the purchase of these buses for 1 year, they could make significant savings that would cause the rest of their budget adjustments to be very minor, I think. And they could strategize on how to get us towards buying electric or leasing electric buses. So it's another possibility, but as I said, now we're down in the weeds. It's really their responsibility. But from an environmental perspective, I would just recommend that we hold off on purchasing any more diesel buses if it's humanly possible.
Mary? Yeah.
I think what I'd like to say is that I would like to see some effort made by the schools to meet the guideline, but rather than these one-off things, what I would like to see is more of a plan that looks beyond this year and goes to at least the next couple of years to show what are some plans they have for cost containment. Because as Parashar pointed out, I think next year we're looking at a 3.76, do I remember that number? So this problem isn't going to get smaller, this problem is going to get bigger, and just kicking the can down, like deferring buses, might help this year, but let's think a little bit longer term, because this problem isn't going away. I think it's going to gradually get worse.
Yeah, I agree, Mary, and that's kind of where I am. So I've been thinking about it. I've watched the school committee debate the matter, so I know where they are and where the superintendent is. My concern is exactly what you said, is that and I appreciate that this year on the high school side, there was some extra revenue and they brought down the high school request. However, that's not sustainable, right? So that's a one-off revenue adjustment, which again, I appreciate if we had a problem that we needed to solve and it wasn't going to be continuing, that works. But if you have an underlying issue of cost growth beyond which we think the town can absorb through the taxes, then you have to do something else. And I don't think it's a significant thing, honestly, in the sense of it's not a dramatic change. If you wait longer, it becomes more dramatic. And that's why, we feel pretty strongly that there should be, or I feel pretty strongly that there should be some plan in place where we start to incrementally control cost growth, right? So to figure out how we can keep it at around 3% or so. And if you don't start, you're going to end up being in the gap between the FinCom guideline and where the school will be on the budget is just going to continue to grow. And so, for instance, this year, the 300,000 that we're apart right now, the only place for that to come from is from the taxpayer, right? So, if we didn't have the revenue if we didn't have the additional piece of revenue from the high school, so that's it would come from the taxpayer, right? There's no free lunch here. So if there isn't a plan in place, the gap will just continue to grow. And that's what my concern is. That I understand they tried to do some things to bring it down somewhat, and I appreciate it, but that doesn't get to the underlying issue, and that's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, I appreciate all the comments that have been made, and I would just like to suggest that that we try to have a meeting with the school committee. I think it's at that level. I think we should be working with the school committee. It is the school committee's article to begin with. All of these articles come from the school committee. And I would like to suggest that we meet with them to discuss this issue and to lay out just the concerns that we have, in front of them, with them, and hear their concerns, because I think there is some common ground. I think that they understand this as well, that we just can't keep raising the costs every year. So I would just like to suggest that we try to have a meeting before we make any decisions. I like the amendment. I was there with you to begin with, at the beginning. But, before we solidify an amendment necessarily right now, that we meet with them and see what they can do, what we can do, how we can come to an understanding if it's possible.
Okay. Anybody else have comments? Let's, Greg, you want to give a comment?
So I do remember them talking about a plan, of retirees and all of that stuff, helping to drive down the budget and stuff like that. They had that in place, and Dr. Hunter definitely admitted, they're looking for other ways to continue to cut that. A couple comments that I did want to make is the gap on the town was $1 million, right? They didn't hit the guidelines, correct me if I'm wrong.
Town did hit the-
They did by having to carry forward $600K from the previous year, 309. So they technically didn't hit their budget.
Greg, you got to
correct?
speak in the
You have to talk in the
microphone.
microphone. yeah,
Oh,
nobody
sorry,
can hear
thank you. So they didn't meet the guidelines unless they had the carryover from the previous year, correct?
Right, and they haven't been able to do that for 2 years.
Right, so they haven't
But
been
they've
able to
also
do that.
reduced what they were spending on CapEx and salary, right?
Right, so, but we're not forcing them to hit theirs, but they had the carryover.
Yes, they did.
They were allowed to do that, right? My second comment is, if we take it from the taxpayer's point of view, yes, everything ultimately, as you said, comes back to the taxpayer having to do that. If we add up CPS and CCSHS, right, we're now down to a gap of 120, somewhere in that, 120, 125, right? So
170.
for our guideline amount that we wanted to give, we're now down to a 120.
I think it's 170,000.
312 minus 174, so that's what,
Is it 130?
130?
Okay.
125,
Yep.
130. So now we're really talking about 130K that.
Well, yeah, you are, from a dollar's
From an
perspective.
overall
Right,
budget.
right.
Yeah, from an overall,
But-
but I'm not looking, I agree
Right.
that like a budget should be set and we should be hit.
No, but I hear you, but that's correct, we are, that's exactly what, so if you assume you can take that revenue and offset it, they are two separate budgets, right?
Yeah, I totally agree.
And, as I said, my issue is, that what are you gonna do next year? And you don't have the extra Chapter 70 income, right? That was a windfall, right? What do you do next year?
Right. Can we ask the town the same thing? Right, what are they gonna do next year when they don't have the?
Well, they have receipts coming back up, right? So they should be okay. But we do ask the town the same question, right? We do. But the town has already taken a fair amount off the table during COVID, right?
Yeah, that
They
I
did.
That I totally agree with. They took a lot
So,
off the
right, so we're in a different position.
Yeah, I'm just getting to his
Yeah.
perspective of
Yeah,
from the
no.
taxpayers, now we're down to,
Right.
120 or we'll call it 130, over the guideline, right? And we all know what is one of Concord's most important things, right? It's the school system, right? That,
Right.
driving services to
Right.
kids and driving all of that. It's the school system that
Yes,
drives a lot of what Concord has.
yeah. And 120,000 on 43 million is going to make a significant difference to the experience? I don't think so, right? So that, I think there could be some give in that number. That's a $43 million budget,
That's also
right?
true, but what's the average, miscalculation on a budget, right? We were talking 0.7%, I think,
Yeah,
is
well, exactly.
So I guess, just, and I know there are other folks here, but I guess, Greg, I would argue, I'm not even sure whether a $150,000 impact would make a difference or not. And that's my point. We've not seen any options with the trade-offs of what it would mean. That in particular,
They've argued that at the school.
sorry?
Didn't they, they've argued that at the school?
I've not seen anything public that says if you meet this level, go down here, here's
In
what
order
you're
to
trading
meet-
off.
in order to
meet the guidelines.
Oh, to meet the
Yeah, to
guidelines.
meet the
Yeah,
guidelines.
so there could very well be an impact, but we're being asked to make a decision without truly understanding what the impacts could be and whether we want the trade-offs. Personally, that's where I'm coming from. That's all.
Don, go ahead.
First, I want to thank everybody for the comments I've just been listening to, and I agree pretty much down the line. Greg, by pointing out the problems with the other budgets, you've actually elevated this issue in my mind, because I realize this is more critical that we maintain. If we have budget creep happening everywhere, we are in a bigger hole than I thought. So yes, we do have some one-time fixes in these other budgets, the high school budget, et cetera, but this, we cannot be lax across the board or count on those fixes recurring when we know they won't. Secondly, I think from an optics perspective, I really like slide 4, Parashar, where you say, why meet the guideline? And I think you're burying the lead when you say meeting guidelines is critical to moderating property tax growth, especially with the new middle school. I think a lot of folks will hear 3.45% and think, oh, that's pretty reasonable. But if we demonstrate why we set the guideline and that the cost of the new, the bond initiative is in addition to the budget, that this entirety, this is a much larger increase in spend on education for the town. To Greg's point, this is important to the town, but we are making a mammoth investment in education, and there has to be some reasonable limitation. I think I really hope that this committee does not get involved in telling the school committee, giving them suggestions of where to find the savings, because I think that's very inappropriate. And I'm sure that the true solution is not an across-the-board cut. It's a little of this, or it's, you know, yeah. And certainly, I do think, by the way, that diesel school buses would a lot of folks would vote against that if given the opportunity to. So, so overall, I think it'd be very powerful, though, to demonstrate the cost of the new building plus the school budget increase guideline is a significant increase in our spend on education. Thanks.
I got some people up here.
Okay,
Is that all right?
I just wanted to,
Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, again, if it didn't pass at town meeting, the moderator did send us a note about what that would happen. Can you reiterate obviously for everybody online that may have not seen, they may have heard the discussion.
Yeah.
Remember, they heard the discussion of what would happen.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
actually different than.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad you said that.
I don't know if you want to do it right now or just at some other point.
I'll do it at another point, but thank you for reminding me. Okay, Eric?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, just wanted to add, I mean, I support this amendment in the spirit of trying to proactively find a solution here. We need to fund the schools, which means the town, we need an approved budget, and it needs to come in within the guideline for the reasons that have already been mentioned. I really think the solution ought to have come from the school administration. This is their budget, and I'd like to hear from them on the plan going forward. But I do support this now, again, in the spirit of finding a solution. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Lois, did you have your hand up? Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I did. I also support the amendment, and for all the reasons people have stated, I think it's important that we look at this situation in the larger context, and the points that have been made about this failure of CPS to meet the guideline is coming in the same year when the taxpayers in Concord voted to substantially raise their property taxes in order to make a very substantial investment in the quality of education in Concord in the form of a new middle school. The town has a lot of needs that need to be met. Providing a good education for the children in the town is a critical need. So are keeping roads in good repair and sidewalks in good repair. So are supporting the administrative functions of the town. So is giving the police and the fire resources safe working environments. Those are buildings that will need replacing at some point. We have a lot of needs, and we're trying to balance a lot of considerations. So I think this is an appropriate place to draw the line. And with respect to what Dee said, I agree it would be good to sit down with CPS and have the conversation. But I think we should go ahead and vote on this amendment, because that does not foreclose the conversation. It frames it, and then the conversation can go ahead. So, so that basically covers my major points.
Thank you, Lois. Amrith?
Yeah, I think I want to continue where Lewis left off. It is within the realm of authority for town meeting to propose to the school committee how they would like the budget to come to whatever level we want. I support the amendment, but to frame the conversation with the school committee, I think the amendment should go a little bit further and propose, I think, what statute calls non-binding recommendations to the school committee on how they should get their budget to get to the level we want. 0.72% may not look like a lot, but over 5 years, that's 3%. And that's what we're considering the guideline amount to be. So I agree with the amendment, but I think we should consider an amendment which goes a little bit further and propose something on how we get it down. Dean suggested buses, but I would say generally reduce, defer some expenses. Make those kinds of recommendations part of the motion and see what happens. That's all I got.
Thank you, Amrith. Peggy?
Yes, I agree with Dee. I think we should have a conversation with the school committee. I think it's, for $300,000, I think we have a very strong point. I think the school committee, we should honor their budgeting by talking to them, and hopefully we can come to town meeting with a compromise, either our level or their level, or we agree on something in between and not have too much confusion. My understanding is our current recommendation is no action, but perhaps tonight we'd like to, what is it right now? Recommendation at town meeting? Okay,
We cannot vote no action. That would not be a good idea.
okay.
We
So
have voted
recommend,
no action. No,
recommendation.
Hold on. We already voted no action, Amrith.
Yeah.
That-
I'd like to change that to recommendation at town meeting. And have that conversation as Dee suggested, and do it that way. It's only 2 weeks away, so this is nothing's going to be in writing except the actual motion. There's not a, it's in the report. So that's what I would
So
like to see.
what we were doing is we said we would have no action on the item, but in this amendment at the meeting, we would recommend the guideline amount. So that's our plan of action right now.
So I think we should meet with them and then just put in, recommendation at town meeting, and the motion could change to a different number if we both agree on it. I would prefer to come to town meeting with an agreement on a number. I totally support, sticking to our guns with the guideline, but I like Dee's idea of having a meeting.
Okay, are there any, Kathy? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
My comment is not directly associated with that. I support this response of no action. We are the finance committee of the town, and it is our responsibility to look at the finances and look at the budgets and make a determination for our constituents as to whether or not the budgets are reasonable. I have voiced in the year and a half that I've been on the committee my concerns about the fact that taxes and expenses are always going up, and we do have a town school system that we're very proud of, and we know that escalation is in there because we have contracted salaries for our teachers, which we've benchmarked, and we know that that's competitive. Having been a finance professional and been in the business world, you can manage your expenses. We all do it at our homes, and I just feel that this is a very responsible thing for us to be doing. And what I would like to see over and above just this particular response is something I believe Mary said I'd like to echo, is that we should be having a conversation within the town about a longer range plan for expense containment, because we do have some very big ticket items to face. Thank you.
Brian? Okay. Sorry, did you have a comment?
So, I respect the fact that we want to go talk to the school committee and maybe come up with some compromise, et cetera, but frankly, I don't necessarily feel like we should always end up in the same place with all entities. Sometimes it's okay to present the voters with two different options and let them make the choice. So I'm all for sitting down, having the school committee sit down. Maybe they can show us some of the options they considered and the trade-offs. Haven't seen it yet, personally, maybe they've done it, but
Did we formally ask them for, like, hey, what are the trade-offs?
Did we ask them?
The finance committee.
No, we haven't
no,
formally
we
asked.
haven't,
But however, in their own discussions, Greg, so some members of the school committee asked for that in thinking about it, and not in any specific way, no.
We keep saying, let's have discussions, what are the trade-offs?
Yeah.
And we haven't asked to see those trade-offs, so they didn't know.
so
Well, but they,
Greg, you have to talk.
you gotta talk into the microphone.
Yours catches so good, so far away. I was just curious, we keep asking the question that we should see the trade-offs, or we keep mentioning that we want to see the trade-offs. I didn't know if finance committee formally asked, hey, do you have trade-offs to balance the budget? Have we ever asked them?
no, what we
So,
they said they can't meet the number, so,
well, I guess I'll say something even more.
Yeah, but we never went back.
Here's my response, Greg. No, here's my response. Both in my public sector life and my private sector life, when you're asked to meet a budget number, either meet the number or you say, I can't, and here's the trade-offs. I did not think, maybe my fault, I did not think that that would be a specific request we had to make. So mea culpa.
Totally agree, but we did not, I 100% agree with that. That would be a request that we had to make. I'm just asking.
We have it, and again, I'm willing to sit down and have that conversation. That would be great. But I will also say, at the end of the day, if we can't come to some agreement and understand the trade-offs, there's nothing wrong with presenting it.
I think we
to the
did.
town.
I think we did, because we had this conversation as a public meeting, and the school committee, some school committee members were here, and they brought that back to their school, the bigger school committee, and they had the conversation. So did we write a letter? No. But was the communication there? Yes.
Yes, that's exactly what I
Yes,
remember too.
yes, it was.
all right. I don't see any other hands raised, so, oh, I'm sorry, I do.
Just quickly, I look back at 2017, just because I was on the committee at that time. Instead of a recommendation of no action, the Finance Committee report said, the Finance Committee recommends affirmative action at a number that was lower than the school committee was coming in at. So it was a different recommendation, and then we would be then responsible to bring that amendment, because they're going to move the higher number,
Yeah.
which we intend to do based on Parashar's but to come in with a recommendation of no action just seems kind of antithetical to what our intent really seems to be here.
Yeah,
So-
the option too was that we'd be able to explain that in our report, right? So,
Right. So in the 2017 report, it's the explanatory paragraph that I'll just read it. It says, this article provides annual operating budget for the public schools with additional funding above the Finance Committee guideline in the amount of $236,580. The additional funding provides, and then there is some explanation that the school committee provided. This additional funding provides these things that we are going to identify. And that's their way of laying the groundwork for why they need it. Like, if you don't vote for this, we won't get these things. So that's their right. But then we recommend affirmative action at 36 million, blah, blah, which was the 200 and something thousand less. So as opposed to recommending no action.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem, and I guess if Carmen, I think, was on
Yes, she
the
is,
Zoom
yeah.
call,
Yes, she's
I
here.
actually had communication with her about how I should structure this
Yeah.
in a way to introduce this new number. So maybe she can address what the best approach would be, given the timing of the printing of the warrant article and everything else.
There she is.
But I have no concerns with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. So the Parashar's motion to amend the main motion is totally appropriate to bring at town meeting. And I think it's a perfectly, if that's the direction the Finance Committee wishes to go, it would be perfectly appropriate either as the committee did in 2017, to recommend affirmative action at a lower number, in which case the motion that Parashar has prepared to amend the main motion, if it is brought at a higher number, would be one that a member of the Finance Committee would bring to the floor. Or you could print in the Finance Committee report that you intend to amend the motion, the main motion under the article. But it's actually probably cleaner to simply recommend affirmative action at a lower number, and to make that happen at town meeting. If there's a main motion for a higher number, you would have to bring the amendment.
Chris, I have a question, if I might.
Yes, Amrith.
Carmen, who would normally makes this motion for the school? Is that a select board? Is it a FinCom? Is it a school committee? Who would be making the motion?
It would be a Concord resident member of the school committee.
So there is no option for FinCom to make the motion at a lower number, make the main motion at a lower number?
We historically have not done that.
Okay, thank you.
I know some towns do that, but we historically have not done that.
Carmen, while we have you up, do you just want to quickly explain the confusion that we had around what happens if we vote no with respect to a high school versus CPS?
Yeah, I'd be pleased to do that. So apologies to the Finance Committee, but I led you astray in answering the question, what happens if the meeting were to vote no action on the Concord Public Schools budget? And I told you that it was my understanding that there's a process that involves the Department of Education and last year's budget that would allow the school to have a budget if none were voted by town meeting. That is true with respect to the region for the district, but it is not true with respect to the public schools. And as it turns out, the public schools, it is simply mandatory under state law that the town appropriate sufficient funds for the public schools to be open and run. And if the town were to fail to do that, then there could be an action either by the Attorney General of the state or by 10 taxpayers in the town of Concord to compel the town to fund the budget for the public schools. So that turns out to be what the answer is with respect to the public schools. It's a different answer when we're talking about the region. So
Carmen,
again, for misleading you.
Carmen, just a quick question. What does sufficient budget mean?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, and there's a bunch of case law about it. It's gone both ways. You know, that there are decisions out there that say if the town appropriates an amount of money that's insufficient for the school to meet its collective bargaining obligations, then that's not a sufficient budget. But there's also case law that goes the other way. So I cannot tell you what, with any kind of reliability, what the answer to that would be.
So Carmen, from a process standpoint, we voted no action last time. If we want to actually vote affirmative action on a number, what would we have to do as a FinCom today or before a town meeting?
Well, we can just vote. We can change the vote and go again.
Yeah, you just need another motion and vote to rescind your prior recommendation and instead to recommend whatever it is you wish to recommend.
We'd vote to affirmative action on the amendment?
We'd vote.
You vote affirmative action at a lower number.
It's on the budget. So we vote on recommendations on warrant articles. So there's a warrant article from the school, which is
Right,
18.
at this level.
So what Dean was suggesting is that we would vote affirmative action on that article at a different number.
Got it, okay.
I think that sounds a little cleaner to me.
Actually, I'm
sounds
not
cool.
sure it does sound good. I'm
No, it
wondering
doesn't,
if
no.
it would be stronger to stick with our no action at the budget they're submitting and the amendment. I think that's a stronger position.
It's clearer, it shows what.
It's much,
Just going at a lower number, people see the thing up on the board, they're like.
it's
"Oh,
affirmative
I'm ready to do this,"
action.
you know.
We're starting with affirmative action and then, but then keep listening because we really don't mean that. We mean a lower number as opposed to no action at this number and here's our counter offer. But while I have the mic, I just want to say that I would support the amendment, and I would support inviting the school committee in here next week, and hopefully we can get to a compromise solution. So we go into that with no action at the proposed budget, an amendment at a guideline, and then we still keep the conversation going, and things can change before we walk into town meeting. We can withdraw our amendment, we can change our vote to affirmative action. So we're not locked into that. But I want to go into that conversation with the school committee, being clear on our position.
My only question is, if we are going to meet with the committee, to Dee's point, and Mary, to your point, why are we going to do anything at all tonight? Why not? Why are we adding more?
We don't have to. We
Do
don't
I
have
have
to.
to say that again, Brian?
I was just curious, like, we shouldn't do anything unless, if we are in fact going to meet with the committee, let's just meet with them
Okay.
and then make a determination. There's no reason for us to do anything.
there wasn't-
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we don't have to do anything.
And I would be supportive of that too, but I do feel like, we are at a higher level, and us micromanaging what they're actually doing in their budget is off scope.
I agree.
For us to make suggestions
I
is
agree.
off scope. And what we need to do is come in with a strategic budget that's in the best interest of the overall town. The schools are a part of the town, but once we make a guideline, we do that with a lot of thought and care, and I think that they should come in within that guideline. We have not made an unreasonable guideline for them to meet. 150,000 or 312,000. I completely appreciate what you're saying, Greg. I have kids in the school. I want to make sure that they get a world-class education, but we all have to meet a budget, even at home.
I would like to go back to suggesting,
Just a second. Just a second. Okay, Dean, did you have something to say?
Yeah, Brian was suggesting that we don't move our motion for the amendment. I would recommend that we do that, and the reason I would say we do that this evening is that we handed them a guideline, and they voted and approved of their budget in the face of our number. We want to tell them we are serious, and so why don't we just say we intend to make this amendment and make that motion this evening, and then we can have a conversation.
I support that. I completely agree with Dean.
Okay,
I don't, and again, making a motion tonight and taking a clear position tonight just clarifies the parameters of the discussion. It doesn't mean the discussion doesn't take place, but I think it takes place in a defined context. So I agree with Dean. I agree that we should have a conversation, but I'd like to see the motion made.
okay. Peggy?
I was going to go back to the possibility of tonight voting to recommend at town meeting. We do have another meeting next week, but if the sense of the board is to move affirmative action at the lower number, I would support that.
Okay, thank you. All right, any more discussion? Hold on. Okay, so couple of things. So one is we have a desire to meet with the school committee. So I can reach out to Cynthia and find out if that will work out. I don't know if they're available next week or not, but let me see if that's possible. And I'll explain what it is we're off to go do, right? So we're interested in having a dialogue around where we each are on this matter. In terms of the recommendation, so we have the proposal by Parashar that we propose an amendment that we take to the floor with respect to 18. So why don't we talk about that one? So can I have, we've had discussion, so does anyone want to make a motion with respect to Parashar's recommendation on amendment to 18 to take it to the guideline?
Can I just ask a question for clarification? The question is, if we do that, are we leaving our past no action vote in place and just
Yes.
voting on the amendment?
Yes, absolutely, that hasn't changed, right?
Okay,
This is what you do after no action, so we're saying there's no action,
Okay.
but here's our suggested, answer, if you will.
okay.
Yeah, I've heard all the arguments, but I would like to suggest that we get rid of the no action right now, and that we can replace it with,
Okay, hold on, we're not talking about that yet, so.
what are we talking about?
Okay, we're talking about Parashar's amendment, so we've got to do it with some clarity, okay? Okay, so he said he wants to have us, FinCom, go to town meeting with an amendment on 18 to take it to the guideline level. I want to talk about that right now, okay? All right, anybody, Ray?
Yeah, if we're meeting with the school committee, are we hoping that they're going to come to our number? I don't think I mean, if we just go and say, we don't need to have a meeting with them to tell them that we're not going to their number.
Well, we think it's worth a dialogue, so I don't know if they want to come talk to us, but we can certainly ask.
Yeah, okay.
So
Because maybe there is room, right? So maybe there is room to talk, maybe there's something that they want to move on, or we want to move on, but I think
Okay.
we have to have,
Okay.
I am confused.
okay,
We
can
have
I?
already- We've already taken a vote of no action.
Correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct. We're not
So-
talking about that right now, right?
So does the school committee know that we took that vote?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay,
so,
okay, good.
all right, so now what are we trying to amend? I mean, we've already made the action.
We're giving the town another number, right? So we said, don't vote on that number.
Yeah,
Here's the number we'd like you to vote on. We'd like there to be a school budget, right?
right.
So we're giving them the guideline number. We're saying, let's amend 18 to the
Okay,
school's number to,
But Parashaw's presentation says how to get there, and I don't know that we want to do that, right?
No, let me clarify. That first slide with the amendment is what we would
is all we're
present.
talking about, not the presentation.
The presentation was simply rationale and justification from my perspective of why we should support that
Right,
number.
we're not ready to.
That's all.
Right.
I'm not suggesting micromanaging.
Okay. Peggy, you still have your hand up. Do you still have a question, or you're done?
No, I think the motion, what we are trying to do tonight would be to move affirmative action for the school committee at the lower number. And then all we have to do, if we keep that number,
I'm sorry, that's not where we are. So the first
Okay.
thing, so that
I'm sorry.
what Shar talked about was, we're not changing, so we're not talking about the no action vote. Let's put that off to the side, okay? Now we're talking about something else, which is to amend, go to town meeting and say, FinCom would like to amend Article 18 and move the number lower to the FinCom guideline for CPS. That's what we're talking about right now.
Right.
I need a motion.
I'm going to make a motion to amend Article 18 when we get to town meeting to replace 43,186,745 with the guideline number we adopted for CPS, which I don't have right now in front of me.
42,836,314 is what is on your presentation,
Thank you.
from 43,148,899. I'll second it.
So are we voting affirmative action on that
No, it's
recommendation?
not, we're not changing the affirmative action, Peggy. So
Okay, okay.
this is
We're
an
not
amendment to
recommending.
someone else's article.
We're not
That's
making
what
a
it is.
recommendation.
It's not a FinCom recommendation on 18. We're not talking about that. We're amending the article.
It's our own article. We're not recommending on someone else's article.
Our own amendment.
No, it's there.
Committee no action.
Well, we're amending.
We're voting to
We're
amend
amending somebody else's
the
article.
motion on the floor when it comes up.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion. Do we need further discussion on that motion? No? Okay. All right, so we will take a vote on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, keep your hands up, make
Aye.
sure, everyone knows. All opposed? Okay, one. Okay.
Is Eric opposed?
Eric, can we see you?
Sorry, I'm a yes. My camera's not working.
Okay, so we have one no, and everybody else is a yes, if I have that correct. Lois, my clerk, can you see everybody? Do you have that?
I get to be clerk even when I'm remote.
I know.
Okay, yes. No, I couldn't see who voted against. I can
Who else can
assume,
I
but
count
I'd
on?
rather not. Was it Greg who voted against?
I'm sorry.
Who voted against? What was our one against, Greg?
Greg.
Okay, all right, I will note it.
Okay, so we have that, so that's that thing. Okay, then, go ahead.
So I'm all in favor for meeting with the school committee. I would really, if you can, when you talk to them, ask them to come in with some options and trade-offs, because otherwise, we're just gonna go around each other.
Chris, may I have one more question on that?
I'm sorry, who was
Could I
that?
ask a question? This is Amrit.
Yes, Amrit.
Do we want to go further and make non-binding recommendations similar to what Dean proposed as part of the motion which we put at town meeting floor? Do we want to extend what Parashar has proposed in his slide 2 by including non-binding resolutions? We're permitted to. I'll ask Carmen. Would you
mean with
entertain?
respect to- So when you say you're talking about now how to do it?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so that's a question. My answer is no. I don't know how other people, I personally don't want to provide them, tell them how to change the budget.
Yeah,
them.
I agree with Chris. I don't think at this stage we should do that. We could, maybe after the conversations, if we still aren't in agreement, if they still haven't come down to the guideline number, at that point, not as part of the amendment, but as part of our explanation of the amendment, we could include some suggestions, kind of the way Parashar did in his presentation. But I don't think we can or should put anything in the amendment to the school committee motion that's that specific at this stage. The actual amendment would be moved at town meeting, so there's certainly time to refine it.
Right. I know we can. I'm just asking whether we should or we're comfortable with it. I'm getting the sense we're not comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's my feeling.
That's right, Amrit, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Kathy, you had something else to say or no?
No.
Okay. Okay.
No, my comment is, it's not up to us to tell them how to find 0.75% of their budget.
Right,
Okay?
exactly.
We tell them how much they have to spend. It's $42 million. Let them figure it out.
Yep, okay. So the other question that we had then is there any reason for us to change the no action vote from last week? I don't have any need for that. Are there others who want to change? Ray?
I have a question. I know true democracy is supposed to be messy, or at least it usually is, but I'm tempted to ask Carmen, is there a way we can make this flow in a time-efficient manner at town meeting when we're trying to cover a lot of issues? Is there anything we should do, any input as far as how to proceed?
Madam Chair, would you like me to try and answer that?
Sure.
So I think probably the most efficient way to do this is if the school committee makes a motion under this article for a number that's higher than the finance committee guideline, then a member of the finance committee would come next to the podium and move to amend the article. And so we would have first the school's presentation on their budget. And then the next thing that would happen is we would have the amendment and the meeting would turn to discussion of the amendment, which is also a discussion of the budget, right? I mean, it's really the same discussion. And then we would have a vote on the amendment. And if the amendment passes, then we still have to have one more vote in order to approve the budget at the amended amount. If it fails, we go back to discussion of the budget at its originally moved amount. There actually have been times in our history when we've had 3 numbers proposed for a school budget, one by the finance committee, one by the school committee, and one by the select board. And my predecessors have used a system in which you put all 3 of the numbers on the board and discuss all of them at the same time. And then the vote is you put the highest number first, and then you take the vote on each number as you proceed. And you go with the highest number on the theory that the taxpayers are going to be, that'll be the least desirable number, the highest number. That's the theory anyway. And then whichever one passes with the majority, you stop there. And that's the number that is adopted as the budget. With only one other number proposed, I don't really see a reason to do that kind of a process. I would just have the finance committee, if they knew they were going to make an amendment, just come straight to the podium, make their amendment, and then we would debate the amendment and it would be up or down, and we'd proceed from there. I will say that I think there's arguably a kind of intellectual inconsistency between recommending no action and also moving to amend. Because if you're going to vote it down, if you're going to vote down the motion, but it's all right because it'll all straighten out on the floor of town meeting. So it's really fine whichever way you do it. I think it's great to have some notice for the school committee of what you're thinking about, and some notice for the public of what you're thinking about. And not unusual for this dialogue to happen and for there to be changes in this budget number up until the time we get to the floor of town meeting. So that's fine. Democracy is a little messy that way.
And I actually like, Mary, your idea to keep the no action. Because I think if the sequence of events is what Carmen said, we make the motion. If our motion fails, our recommendation for no action on the original number still stands, and the town can then make a decision whether to go with whatever process plays out if they vote that. But so I think it's okay. I think it's actually better that way.
Hopefully we don't end up with no budget. Both of these articles should end up in a budget.
Oh, yeah, I mean, if they vote for ours, then it's fine. If they vote ours down, clearly the town has an appetite to spend more, and that's fine.
That's fine.
Right? Yeah.
That's fine, exactly.
Alleviates that problem.
Right, right. Okay, so I think, is anybody, I don't see any hands on the Zoom. Go ahead, Mary.
Chris, I wonder if, before we leave this topic, if we want to address one of the concerns in the correspondence as far as why the 300K gap was because of SPED. Do you want to talk about that at all, or do you want to wait and talk about that?
I don't really have any knowledge of that.
Okay.
So that letter doesn't didn't connect to the conversations that I've heard with the school committee, so.
Well, yeah, I think the letter assumed that the 300 gap was isolated to sped
Yeah,
spending.
and
it's
as far, it's not, yeah, it's not, yeah, not as far as we know.
It's an overall
Right.
increase over guideline. It's not, sped is in that mix. So
Right.
it's not, if we took out that sped, we'd beat guideline. No.
No,
it
but
doesn't.
and we don't look at it that way either.
We
so.
don't look at it that way, right. I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. Okay, so at this, so I'm going to approach the school committee to see if we can have a conversation. Essentially, we have two paths, right? So, and I think I explained this, right? So we have the path, what we talked about this evening, which is there's an amendment, we voted no action, and we have an amendment to bring us to the guidelines, so we have that path that we're moving forward on. But we'd also like to move forward on another path, which is we'd like to come and talk to you about, you know, what our concerns are, what your concerns are. And as I said, my underlying concern is less about a specific gap now and more about understanding that we have a growing cost issue that we're going to have to deal with, and we have to come out with a plan to do it, and we don't have one. And so that's something I'd really like to talk to the school committee about. So I'll go off and do that. We're going to stand with our no action vote, and we have voted on an amendment. So I think that's where we are coming out of this. Is that fair? Anything else?
I just have
Okay.
one question for you, if I might.
Yeah.
On this no action thing, I just want to be sure. I watched the last two videos and the conversation here. We're not proposing that at town meeting floor, anybody from FinCom is going to stand up and make a motion of no action, correct? We're not going to formally make a motion looking for a vote of
No. So
Okay.
this is, yeah, no, we're not. This is our recommendations that are included in the FinCom report.
Okay,
And
thank you.
so the town will have that, and we'll have a chance to explain our position as well in that booklet. Okay, is that good? Everybody good? Okay, so I think I can move then on to our next topic. Okay. All right, so officers' nomination process. So every year we go through a process where the chair and the former chairs go off and come back, consider the slate of officers for the next year. So I would like to ask if Dean and Mary would join me in some discussions on that. Sure. Yeah, okay. And then we would come back to the committee with a recommendation for the committee to vote on. And this would be for the clerks, the vice chair, and the chair for next year. Yep. Okay, so we will do that, and I'll figure out when we can come back to the committee. Then we have FinCom. Lois wanted to have a chat with us.
It's thanks to all the good work that Mary did last year in working on revising the structure of the report. It should be easier this year, but it is a complicated document with a lot of moving parts, and it has a drop dead hard deadline. So there are a couple of assignments outstanding. Parashar is going to write the sections of the report that describe the guidelines process and the result of that process, that explains how we go about setting a guideline and what numbers we actually set this year. And he's going to need some support. Is Carrie on the call today? Carrie LaFleur?
She's here. She's in the background. Do you want to?
Oh, okay. And so Carrie, Parashar will need to work with Carrie on that. Greg is going to be doing the portion of the report that deals with the 5-year tax projections, which is a specific obligation that we have. Dean did that last year. He was going to support Greg in that.
Lois?
Chris writes a chair's letter that is part of the introductory section. All three of those items really need to be done by next meeting, a week from today. There'll be a couple of moving parts. There might be some change in numbers that have to be dealt with, but they really should be done. They need to be done by next week.
Quick note, Lois, between
Yeah.
Greg, myself, it looks like a lot of the responsibility for the modeling and the 5-year plan will fall back to me this year.
Oh, okay.
So you know,
Sorry,
that's where
Dean.
it's going to end up. Fine, it's technology, platform issues, et cetera. So it's
Gene, greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
How
much did you
not
pay
a
him?
problem. I can do it again.
What's that?
How much did you pay him?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, whoever's stuck with it, it's got to be in hand by next week. So those 3 items need to be done by next week. And then for those of you that don't have assignments, don't think you're off the hook. One of the sections that we developed for the report last time, which works pretty well, is a chart that summarizes the FinCom recommendations on each article. And it's a way to succinctly set out whether we are recommending affirmative action or no action. And for each article, we state our reasons for having taken the position that we did. And it's short. For most of the articles, we're talking about 3 sentences. And for some of them, the administrative stuff, it's going to look a lot like last year, because the reason why we have an article dealing with meeting procedure hasn't changed from year to year, and the text doesn't need to change. But there are a couple of sections of it that actually will need to be written, including a couple where we haven't made a decision yet. So who would really enjoy writing that summary on our position and the reasons for it for Article 24, the appropriate funds for affordable housing development, 25, Assabet River Bluff? Any volunteers? Would the
Mary?
chair like to assign someone?
Which one do you want, both?
Yeah, I'll do both.
She'll do both.
All right, who's gonna, Mary?
Mary?
Yeah, I'll do it, Lois.
Oh, good. Hi, Mary. Okay. And is 27 being moved, the amending the departmental revolving funds bylaw? I think that's one that you and I can do with Carrie.
I think that's being moved, right? 27
Yeah.
carried departmental revolving funds. It is, right? Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and that's really something, I think that's something that we can just do with Carrie. I don't think that needs a committee member assigned to it. I may ask the person who is the observer for the enterprise funds, the light plant, solid waste, sewer expenditures, to just review the text from last year and make any appropriate changes. So who will that be?
Yeah, it's Greg.
It's Greg. Okay, so Greg, I'll just email you last year's text and you can look at it and tell me if you think that there are any changes that need to be made.
I have a
I doubt.
Lois, I have a question. Did
Yeah.
I just sign up for Article 25? Was that the?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Have we taken a vote on that?
No, we haven't. We haven't
No, we
voted on-
haven't.
We're
We
waiting
haven't
for,
voted on 24 or 25,
When is
but
that
by
due?
the time this thing goes to the printer, we will have.
and when is that due?
the 31st. We're going to vote on the
Well,
31st.
if we had, the vote will be on the 31st. That's one of the things that'll have to drop in afterward once we take the vote.
Yeah, we'll give you some leeway on that, Mary.
You get an extension, Mary, because we haven't voted on it yet. And then the big items that are going to need drafting.
Hold on 1 second. Okay, so
Yeah.
you have light plant.
Greg has the light.
Greg has a light plant. So does anybody have water and sewer? Or what's the third one? We don't really have much to say on them.
I think we should do something.
I don't know if we say something on BD. Does anyone else, is there anybody else who Eric, do you have any of the, do you have recreation or anything like that?
It is a thing.
John,
Is Eric still there? Eric Dahlberg?
Hey, I'm sorry. No, I don't, but I'm happy to help.
We do say something on BD, and BD's an issue, so we should probably.
Yeah, we need someone to write up a PEG access and cable related fund, BD,
Okay, all right.
those two.
Chris, I'll take BD.
Who's that?
Is Amrit, I'll take BD.
Emma? Good,
Yeah,
Lois, you got that? Good, good, good.
Thank you.
Lewis, I'll get you something on BD. I'll email you and ask you for details.
Great. And if you want to look at the format, just take a look at last year's report. You'll see, it's just a couple of sentences. And authorize expenditure from PEG access and cable related fund. That's the telecommunication stuff. Is there
And we'll
anyone who's been observer to that group?
Somebody's, just start volunteering. You guys know enough about, we heard it at the hearing, right there. It's about a 3-sentence write-up, so
I could
You
take
can
that.
try.
This is Eric.
there we go.
Okay, thanks, Eric. I'll summarize all this in emails to you, so you won't have to remember.
Beyond that, so can you just read the stuff on the other DPW and look at it? You don't need to be an observer of all of them. Can you just cover all of them?
For the, so just.
The DPW, and sewer, and just cover all of them. So Greg will cover the 3 big enterprises. Amrit's gonna do
Thank
BD.
you.
Eric said he would do PEG.
Great. So that leaves the big elephant in the room, which is the schools. So, and those sections, this has been a complicated enough year. Well, there's the CPS budget, which we've been talking about today. One of us needs to write that up. The Concord Public Schools budget and the Concord Schools capital projects. That also, the portions of the report that deal with the school budgets, those are going to be gone into in more detail in a highlight section. So that's a bigger task, Chris. So how do you want that handled?
Right, so Kathy, you spent a lot of time on schools, right? Yep, and you have it now, right, Lois?
Yeah, but.
Right, so can can you two divide up how you want to do it? And I'll obviously edit particularly the highlight section, but if you two can write that up, that would be good.
Okay. So both the Concord Public Schools and the CCHS.
Yeah.
And then the last little orphan that I'm seeing here is the appropriation to the stabilization fund, which Chris, I think you should do. That is our,
I can do
you know, that's our Band-Aid for to keep property taxes down in light of the borrowing on the middle school.
Yep.
So. Okay, there may be more. I'll get all this summarized and out to all of you by email tomorrow, so you know what you're responsible for. And I will look forward to getting bits and pieces of things so we can start to put this together. It's really not a lot of time. The report needs to be completely compiled, I think, in advance of the April 7th meeting, so that there's just a little bit of editing to do on it based on any decisions we make then. And that really means getting the bulk of the text in hand to work with in a week, by March 31st. Okay, and this doesn't even involve, and Carrie knows that she and I are going to be spending a lot of time on the phone next week, because there are big chunks of the report that we are really very dependent on her for.
All right, good. And thank you, Lois. Kathy, did you have a question, or are you all set?
All set.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? Are we good on the report? Okay, good. Let's see, do we have anything else? Calendar. So we do have a meeting for next week. As I said, I don't know whether we would be joined by the school committee or not, but if we are not, we still have it because we have 24 and 25 to vote. So it could be a short meeting. And I'm hoping that the select board is scheduled to vote on those 2 items on the 28th. So when we meet on the 31st, we should know where they stand, which is one of the things we were waiting for. Right. Okay, so we might have a very brief meeting on next Thursday, or if the school committee joins us, it'll probably be a little bit longer. All right?
These articles 24 and 25?
24 and 25 are the only ones we haven't made recommendations on yet. Okay, and then after that, so if Carrie had place marked us for a couple more, I won't know until I see you next time as to whether we're going to need those meetings or not. You got to keep holding them, because if something happens and we have to get together, we have to get together. But right now, I don't have anything on those agendas. If we get through everything we need next week, then maybe we don't need any more after that. I doubt it, but let's see. Okay? So in the calendar, we have next week on the 31st, we also have April 7th, we have a meeting. And then we have another meeting on the end of April at the 28th. So we have one more that's in the books, extra, if you will, for April, but we'll see if we need anything else. If we need to, we'll book some more. Okay? All right, so that's calendar. And public comment. So see if we have any public comment. I don't know, Chris, how will I see public comment?
You can raise your hand.
Raised hands? Okay, if folks want to make a public comment, you can raise your hand and we will bring you up.
There are none.
Okay, I don't see any public comment, so unless there's any other business, I will
So moved.
take a motion to adjourn. Wait until I make the motion.
Hang on. There's a couple of people raising their hands. I don't know whether.
Okay, I'm sorry. Is it, who's raising their hand?
Casey Atkins, yeah.
Yeah, I can't read that name, so can someone tell me who that is?
That's Casey Atkins.
Casey Atkins. Oh, yes, Ms. Atkins.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Casey Atkins. I am at 477 Lawsbrook Road, and I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of the CPAC. The CPAC is the Special Education Parent Advisory Council. We are established by Mass General Law. Each public school district in the Commonwealth has one, and part of our legal charge is to advise and participate in matters pertaining to special education in the district. We report to the school committee. I'm here this evening to just voice support for the CPS budget as passed by the school committee. This was incredibly helpful hearing your comments and the discussion here tonight, and I deeply appreciate that opportunity to hear it. We stand in support with the school committee. We do understand that, I know you folks don't get into the line item budgeting, but that there are FTEs that are new FTEs coming in as part of this budget that will be part of completing the continuum of intensive special education programs in the district. Special education tends to be one of those matters that is very emotional and hard to track budgeting. And to be clear, these programs are programs that are critical infrastructure in order to service our most vulnerable students who are likely otherwise, if those services don't exist in the district, could be sent out of district, which, as most of you know, is a very expensive proposition, where two students being sent out of district, can come to between transportation and the cost to go to schools could reach easily over $300,000. We support the investment in this critical infrastructure for special education, not only as a budgetary matter over time, which makes more sense for the district and the town, but to keep these students in their communities, to keep them part of their community, in their schools with their peers. I know that being on the finance committee is no easy task, and I deeply appreciate the commitment that all of you have to the town and the time and energy that you take on a frequent basis to get into these matters. We hope that you will engage in the conversations with the school committee about why this funding is so important for special education. Our students are general education students first, and then they are special education students. Students on IEPs, students on 504 plans. We are in the process, and Dr. Hunter has played a critical role in building out this infrastructure since she started in the district. We are hoping that this can cap the continuum of services and keep our students in district. Thank you so much for your time and your service to the town.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I can't read your name. I think, is it Dan Healy? Is that the name? All right, Dan.
Yes, hi, Dan Healy, 77 Aiden Drive, and sorry I couldn't figure out how to do the little yellow hand raise thing, but I'm glad you saw my actual hand go up on the camera. I'm actually glad that I got called in right after Casey, because I really just want to echo what she was saying, and give my full support to the full budget. I'm not on CPAC, but I am a special education parent. I have 3 kids who are in the Concord Public Schools. The oldest of them is in special education, and I love that he is able to be in the general education population with all the other kids. He's making such good friends, and he has such a great team supporting him over at Willard. I want to see everything that that can be done for the special education program be done. It's what I grew up here in town. I went to the Concord Public Schools. When it was time to raise my own kids, I couldn't think of a better place to do it. And the school system we have, the public school system, it's it might be the primary reason why this is such a great place to raise our kids. And the idea that my son who does have special needs can be a part of a part of that public school system with all his friends, with everybody else, having access to the same great teachers that are carrying on the legacy of the ones I had. I love that that we look to set things up so they can have all those supports in the general public school system. I don't know, Casey said it better than I could, and I'm afraid I'm going to start to ramble, but I really appreciate all the work you're doing. I really appreciate everything that goes into making these budgets and attending these meetings. And it takes quite a commitment to do that. I see you and I appreciate you, and I really did want to take this chance to just voice my support for it. So thanks for letting me speak, and have a great night.
Thank you, Dan. I'm having a hard time reading the names. Is it Chris Taylor? Turner.
Hi.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, yep. Chris Tarlow from 1295 Main Street. I just want to thank you for continuing to review the budget, and just also say that I think Dr. Hunter has done a lot of work to get the budget to where it is. I do follow school committee meetings. I guess I'm just also a little confused of why I just don't think it's sustainable to have a 2.8% increase when teachers are getting paid 5% increase. It just doesn't seem sustainable year after year to keep making cuts to things kids need. We are an inclusion district, and that's our mission. And for the program to continue, they're going to be growing. There's more students aging into them, and specifically the middle school needs more support in these programs. I think if you want to support all the disabilities in our district, it's really hard work and it's expensive. And we need highly trained teachers, certified teachers, and a robust professional development. If anything, I think the budget's too low for the needs of all the students we want to support. Inclusion shouldn't be seen as a cost savings mission. It's the mission that we should be doing. If it's important to Dr. Hunter, it's important to the school committee, and I think you should approve this budget.
Thank you. Meg Amara, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name.
That's okay. It's Meg and Sarah. Thank you so much. I am at 31 Central Street. And I also want to thank everyone for everything that they're doing. I feel like I learned a ton during this conversation. And these are really hard choices. And I appreciate the Finance Committee's ability to go between thinking about short-term, what do we need to do for next year's budget, while also being mindful of long-term implications. That's exactly what this town needs. I also want to add my voice. I come here just as an individual, but also a parent of kids. I have 3 kids, 2 of whom are at Thoreau, one of whom will be starting kindergarten next year. And both of my older two children are on IEPs. And I think, hearing the conversation around, well, what's 120,000, what's 300,000? And I think really for so much of it, it is staff. And I feel so grateful for the experience that I've gotten with both of my children. And it really comes down to having dedicated, trained, skilled staff to first just find out what's going on, which takes time, and then figuring out kind of what collection of supports each of my children needs. And it's allowed them to really thrive. And so I feel like I personally am just so grateful for that experience. I obviously want those supports to be there long-term for them, but also for all kids, because I think it, just as the other folks commenting said, it really benefits the whole community to be an inclusion community, to have diversity of experience, learning styles, things of that nature. So I know, when looking at a budget this large, it can be perplexing. There are clearly conversations that have happened, that I haven't been a part of or heard, as well as potentially some future conversations. But I do just want to kind of illustrate, just at a very personal level, the impact of what we're talking about. I have seen firsthand the difference that can be made with well-trained staff who have the capacity as well as the skill set to really get to know our children and provide them with what they need. It's been one of the best parts of living in this community for us. And so I just want to add my voice to the support and ask for the support of the full CPS budget. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else. Am I correct? Does anyone see anybody else? Okay.
Nope.
Okay. Great. So now I will I will take a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.